Hello, Orville Nation. We have a very, very special treat for you all tonight. Let me introduce our co-host George Peter Gatsis,
Greetings, everybody.
and part of our panel, John Talks, Comics Division, and our very, very special guest, the man who Stan Lee called a genius, the man who ran Spider-Man and Hulk, and the gentleman who is launching Meta Studios tonight, Paul Jenkins. Thank you, Paul, for coming.
Thanks for having me on, guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so I want to ask you, what was it like for you growing up?
You know, when I was a little kid, obviously my brother and I had to deal with the difficulty of being on a farm. You know, being kind of deprived. We didn't have things like electricity, and we struggled for food. And my brother and I would walk to school a couple of miles to get to school every day because my mum couldn't afford the bus fare. So you come from a difficult situation like that, and you would think that made you unhappy, but there's so much of that part of my life that has come into my work. You know, I wrote in an issue of Hellblazer when I was working on Hellblazer. I wrote an issue. It's actually issue number 97, and it's about where John Constantine goes into a forest in the middle of the night. And the idea would be that if you walk into a forest in the middle of the night, if you confront your fears, then when you leave the forest on the other side, you've left some of your fears behind, right? So Constantine goes into this forest at a pivotal moment in his life, and he runs into a gypsy, and the gypsy is a shepherd. And one thing that was really important to me, and by the way, this is probably almost, and I do not know this is possibly an exclusive for Orville Nation, so bear with me if anybody cares. Back in Swamp Thing 88, which some people may be aware of, George, I don't know if you're aware of that.
Yes, I'm aware of your works very well, sir.
Yeah, well, in Swamp Thing 88, Alan Moore had written a story in which Swamp Thing meets Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, right?
Yes.
And DC canned it and said, they actually canned it right at the last second and said, we are not willing to print this because we think it might be offensive to, say, Catholics, right?
Yes.
And I was friends with Alan. Obviously, I was his editor for a number of years. And I was very friendly with Rick Veitch, and I was very friendly with Steve Bissett and all the people that John Tolton, all the people that worked on Swamp Thing. And I never really understood how John Constantine was allowed to go and like talk to the devil and have a beer with the devil, but couldn't even, even mention Jesus Christ. So that story, issue 97, is actually John going into a forest and he meets an old gypsy who happens to be a shepherd. And it's obviously Jesus, right? So I actually did the story the first time that Jesus appeared in another DC comic, right?
Yes.
Now that guy who is the gypsy is actually a real person in my life. And even though we went through some difficult stuff, I sort of defy anyone who's ever seen a European badger. Like, you're never going to see one, but I've had one walk around my feet at 2:30 in the morning. So my mom would wake me up and I would go out with the old gypsy and sit in a moonlit forest and with the snow on the ground and have, you wait about an hour and the boy will come out. So I was raised, in a difficult position, but we knew all the gypsies. I can tell you all of the gypsy lore, like why swallows fly high in the summer, and how you avoid getting hurt by a stinging nettle, all of that stuff, because I was raised that way. So there's so much value in it. And in that story, John Constantine sits with the gypsy and they talk about the badger and the fox and all of these things that were all part of my life. So there's difficulty in it, but from that difficulty, like any comedian will tell you, you bring sort of something to the fore,
That's absolutely fascinating, because I long wondered about many writers, and you have just hit the nail on the head on one of my questions that I was thinking about asking you, and that is, how did you learn to tell a story?
Well, partly it's self-teaching, and partly it's to do with what I wanted to do when I was in college, what I wanted to do when I was even in high school. So it's funny that I ended up working in comics because I'm really not a big comic book fan, and that just drives everybody crazy. I don't know that much about them. I don't read them very often. Now, that would be really annoying to a lot of people who love them. And by the way, I do love them. I love the medium. I love the way that stories can be told using comics, but I'm not a big consumer of that type of entertainment, right? And partly it's because I feel like my life is very interesting. and that I would much rather live my life than read my life. I don't want to read other people's stuff. And one of the reasons why I feel like I had some success at Marvel, especially initially with like Inhumans and the Sentry and some of these projects that they let me kind of rebuild, I didn't read a lot of comics. I wasn't stuck in it. So I would say, George, the answer to your question, where the stories come from, what is a writer is a great question. What is a writer? And to me, maybe a writer is someone that knows how to look at the world and then describe what they see and what they feel. It's as simple as that. Does it have to be any more complicated? Now, as I self-taught, perhaps. Certainly, I'm not a very good typist. I actually look down. I get a bad neck because I can't type without looking at the keyboard. I mean, and you figure how prolific I am, and yet I still can't type. But I think I type at the speed that I think. And, I live, and then I try to describe the things that I see. That's as simple as that. And so, it's hard to know where it comes from. Harlan Ellison used to say, I get all my ideas from a mail order catalog I order from Cleveland.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Anti-Tracker, welcome. Well, Paul, it sounds to me you're more of a storyteller than a writer. And I think the world has enjoyed that much more happiness for your works. Yeah, one of the questions that has always been fascinating to me is that you have such a huge talent stack. And how do you transition from one discipline to the next?
I was recently on a panel, actually last year. It was on like a video game convention. And what they did was they put all the people like me with white beards on, and they said, okay, you've been in the entertainment business, in gaming or whatever, for 20 plus years, right? And they put 5 of us on the panel. They said to a bunch of students that were basically from the local universities, they said, okay, tell these people the thing, what is it that keeps you working in this business? And every single one of us looked at each other and said, well, it's pretty obvious, which is work ethic, right? Yeah. So it's a little bit of my rehashed college lecture, and I apologize for this, but you'll hear me say it quite often, that really I struggle to think that there's any such thing as talent, because talent is really just potential. That's the way that I tend to put it, and if you add that hard work and maturity to it, then it becomes talent, right? So how do I skip between disciplines? Well, I work hard and I learn those disciplines and I understand things about, I might have a brain. If I have a talent, it might be that I have a brain that remembers things. Great. Okay. Beyond that, how do I use that? Well, what I try to do is I try to understand what are the elements of game design that could work, and where do we have audacity in design and storytelling? I often felt that the problem that I would see in mainstream comics, for example, would be there's no audacity in storytelling. There's no audacity when stuff blows up and people punch each other really hard. It would be very audacious to put 2 people in a coffee store and put them on for 6 pages of sitting over a cup of coffee. Can you write that? And can you draw that? Because if you can and you can sustain somebody's interest, that would be much more bold than having a bunch of fighting. So I feel like it's hard work and the application of sort of like a social maturity that allows us, those of us who've had a modicum of success, to continue to sustain that success. And the second part of it, I would say, is that, how do I do it? If I have a talent, I've got 2 talents. One of them is that my brain can switch just like that. I don't know why, but if you put me on a roller coaster and then at the top of the roller coaster, you suddenly stopped it and handed me a piece of paper and said, write me 2 pages on the inside of a ping pong ball, I'd go, great, got it. And I would do it. Right? The other talent is if I'm playing golf and someone putts the ball, no matter how far away it is, I know if it's in and I can say that's in and it will go in. That's all I got.
Nice.
I can tell you're not kidding either.
I'm not kidding. I can do that. I swear. If I say it's going in, even from 50 feet away. And everybody's like, how do you do that? Like, that's my talent, apparently.
So I've kind of noticed something in common with really good writers is that I wouldn't say there's like a point of personal pain, but there's like something that has happened in their life, good or bad, that has been very interesting that they're able to draw upon. With Tolkien, it's, World War One. It seems like that a lot of the great comic writers and writers in general have they have all this life experience where they can draw upon. And it seems like with modern writers these days, they don't necessarily have that experience. They haven't experienced the world like, the previous generations have. So it seems like their stories tend to fall flat more.
I'd probably be inclined to agree. I don't know if there's a way to make any kind of sweeping judgment this generation or any of that kind of stuff. I don't know, right? That's for other people to decide. What I can say is that I did a book last year called Alters, or a couple of years ago. And Alters was a very difficult book to kind of write because it was about people who had a superpower. And again, it's kind of like a mutant power. They get it. But all of the people who get it are people who have a disadvantage in society. Mm-hmm. So it might be that you're marginalized. It might be that you're homeless. It may be that you are trying to work out a physical issue, a mental health issue. And these people get the superpowers. And what was interesting about the story was that you would have a person with a disadvantage and a person with like a hyper advantage, and it would clash in the middle at the human being that lived there, because that's always what we're writing about, is the people. Mm-hmm. The main character of that book was a young transgender woman, right? And what happened in the middle of telling this story, very, very early, I could see this was going to happen anyway, was that a few people would say, I don't believe that middle-aged heterosexual white guy should be writing this book. To which, in part, my answer would be, yeah, but, should Shakespeare then have written Othello? I mean, if I write who I am, then you get a lot of stories about a middle-aged dude that likes playing video games and golf and can call a putt when it goes in. Right. What else, can I only write me? I didn't think so. But I very much understood why, especially the trans community, were a bit wary. But what was happening with that book was that I was showing that book to 6 trans people who were helping me write it the best that I could. And the reason I bring that story up is that at the end of the second arc, the first arc was primarily focused on Chalice, and she's the trans woman. And the second was about a mom who has 2 kids, and she's homeless. And I would do interviews at the back of each of the book, and I would actually interview people who were like trans, and and then they would tell me, and I would say, well, what have I learned this month? And I would tell the audience the things that I had learned as a writer about issues with transgender experiences and so on. And I felt that transgender, that the metaphor was the secret identities and all that kind of stuff, which is why heroes work very well. And at the end of issue 10, I said, I wrote my own editorial, and I said, well, who am I? Who am I to talk about this or schizophrenia or homelessness? Well, let me tell you, I've been homeless twice, and it's no fun. And then when I was able to explain to people how it feels to be raised in a difficult environment, or to be without electricity, or to be incredible, like the poorest kid I've ever met was me, right? And so did I have to come out like that? Was there some requirement? And I can understand exactly some of the difficulties that people who are dealing with issues of their sexuality with their family or something, why should they come out? They should be allowed their life. Do I have to come out as a heterosexual? No, I don't. And so I got to get a small sense of the difficulty that people were dealing with. But I will say that the pain, or whatever you describe it as, it's not really pain, because I didn't feel it as much. I'm sure it was there. But I do think that the experiences were some things that were really important. So tons of my work is about living in 2 worlds, because I have been seen as a guy that's very successful, but I come from a place that has absolutely no opportunity whatsoever. Mix those 2 things together, and that's why I write about living in 2 worlds all the time.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Paul, I'm just curious, when it comes to writing, what in terms of structuring a story, do you have an idea, or do you structure your stories? Do you have kind of like a 3-act structure, or do you think of it that way, or do you just put the pen to the paper and just go and not look back, and kind of where it concludes?
I'm searching for some of my workbooks here, so you see the madness, right? Because I'm like the crazy guy in the movie Seven. Right, I write little tiny writing. I write these manifestos inside my workbooks. So let's see. Look at this page, for example. I don't know if you guys can see that, but that is a giant page of writing for 1 issue of a digital storytelling comic book kind of thing. And then if you...
Paul, can you show us that again? Yes. Okay, there you go.
Yeah, so here's the page-by-page breakdown that I do.
Awesome.
So I will write out the story. Let me just kind of show you that again. I'll write out the story like that. You can see all the madness there. I'm sure people will screen capture it now and see if they can decipher it. Good luck. And then it gets translated to a page by page. So
Cool.
That's cool.
I like to think of myself as one of the most prepared people in terms of writing. When I do a screenplay, I do a minute-by-minute breakdown, and those minute-by-minute breakdowns are incredibly precise. I take 1 minute, and I literally bullet point every single thing that should happen in terms of pacing within that minute. When we look at a 3-act structure in a film, we're also looking at something I think is really important, which is how long does that first act get to unfold? Because I'm telling you right now, it better be 20 to 25 minutes or some time around there. There are ways to break those rules, but if you don't say in 20 minutes what the end of that first act is, you may not have people sustain throughout like 40 minutes. They're not going to stay with your main character if they don't know what the problem is. So if you don't like the 3-act structure and the 20-minute rule, 20 minutes from the end, you get them to their point of emphasis. If you don't like it, don't write screenplays because you're not going to be making films. So I adhere to those structures quite a lot, and I feel that like being prepared and writing out my stuff and knowing what I'm going to write before is really important, because I will be honest, I know a few creators, or quite a lot of creators, that just type and see what happens. And I'm just amazed and slightly appalled by that, because I don't get it. But that, I actually studied English in college, and I actually understood story structure and stuff. So I don't get it, especially the comic industry, guys. It's a hobbyist industry, and I think that's a shame, because we should be doing better.
Wow, that's great to know, because I read books on screenwriting, and I read just on writing in general, and a lot of it, the stuff that I gravitate towards is like you were saying, the importance of structure, and kind of that idea of like those plot points hitting around like the 27 minute mark, or so that's kind of interesting that you were actually bringing up screenwriting too, because it's weird because everybody's got their own like different process, but that kind of I think that's encouraging to just to maintain the importance of structure when it comes to writing, and because I do think it helps me in terms of like a guideline, just kind of wandering in the dark sometimes. So.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we should consider as well is, when people are writing screenplays, oftentimes I'll talk to people and they'll say, I'm on my screenplay, and you say, well, okay, how long have you been on it? And they'll go 9 months, 6 months, and I'm like, man, I can't afford that. Last one I wrote took me 10 days.
Wow.
That's impressive.
Now the structure of it, the minute by minute breakdown, took me a couple of weeks, but it was get it all ready and then just disappear. Go into the office. My wife and kids don't see me for 10 days. I come out like smelling really bad, like head on fire. Go, look, I've invented a screenplay. But I like to think that those first drafts are usually pretty good, and it's because of the attention to detail and structure.
If I can ask a follow up to John's question, Paul. Do you have a lot of people say that Seth MacFarlane brings his animation expertise and his work ethic to the filming. And unlike a lot of other shows that are being filmed, everything is all set when they begin filming for the season. And instead of on another show, like another show they might be still writing episode 4 while they're filming episode 1. But Seth has it all worked out for the whole season. Do you have any comments on bringing that ethic to...
Absolutely. Well done, Seth. That's kind of the point, right? That's like literally where I'm coming from. I don't understand. I sometimes get into these situations where someone will say, especially in Los Angeles, can I do a project for them? And I go, yeah. And they say, okay, per 11-minute episode, you get 16 weeks. And I'm like, what, 16 weeks to write an 11-minute episode? How about 1 a day? How about 2 a day? Like, you got to be kidding me, right? 16 weeks is our production cycle? No way. It's crazy. So the idea that I actually am struggling with the idea that you couldn't and shouldn't deliver it all in advance so you know where you're going. You know where you're going. And it kind of takes me back to, so let's, for example, let me talk about the origin of Wolverine, right? When I wrote the origin of Wolverine for Marvel, there was this kind of funny anecdote, which, we kind of show in the story that I sent to you guys. And one of the things that happened was that when I pitched the origin of Wolverine, which I actually didn't say on the thing that we were doing, one of the reasons why Marvel, I think, had not done the origin of Wolverine is because they didn't know why he had lost his memory. They didn't understand why. They had never created the origin. They'd never understood where they were going. So they were in limbo. For 35 years, you got some guy walking around scratching his head saying, I don't remember my past. And I guess we have that question, why didn't you have that prepared? Like, why am I pitching to you the idea that you're supposed to have had? And so that's frustrating to me. In fact, I just said to Marvel, well, I thought the whole idea of this was that, he has a healing factor. So he cuts himself and it heals. And I just thought that he had a PTSD or something and his brain healed. It just fixed itself and he couldn't remember. That's what happened. It was like it papered over the cracks. And they said, I can't believe you. Brilliant. You're a genius. Couldn't you guys have thought of that?